Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, June 10th, 2022, and we're no longer waiting on the first of the hearings. How about that? We're past our first hearing for the January 6th committee, and that's generally a good thing, and we'll have to talk about that, of course. I don't know. I did do my homework assignment. I hope you did, too. I watched along with everybody else. I probably made a mistake in watching it on C-SPAN versus trying to see it on one of the broadcast networks, although that's usually a better option, is to watch it on C-SPAN. But I guess I would want to have, now that I'm thinking about it, I want to have seen it the way many others would have seen it. And the option for going for C-SPAN was probably tops on the list for most people. And it would have been interesting to see on primetime television on the networks, just to make sure that they fulfilled their obligation and actually aired it. I didn't even check. I knew Fox wasn't, and I knew that C-SPAN would, and ordinarily they're a good choice. Anyway, plus you get usually get some live microphone just before and just after the official beginning and end of the hearings, and sometimes you pick up something fun. And I don't know. I guess I would like to have seen how they presented it on the networks. Did they do commercials? I don't know. I missed the whole thing. Fox News, I understand, not only did they not air the hearings, but they too went commercial-free during their evening presentation, Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham Racist Hours. And I gather that they decided to do it commercial-free so that no one would channel surf during the commercials and accidentally find unfiltered access to the hearings by mistake and actually learn something that they weren't supposed to learn because they're Fox viewers. The other possibility, of course, was, as I suggested, that the Capitol Police officer who was testifying I can't even remember. I don't remember, though. The second half of the hearing, by the way, we'll get around to my review of it, I guess, later on. But it was one of the Capitol Police officers, a woman who was on duty that day and was injured by the crowd and knocked unconscious, in fact, knocked over backwards onto the steps outside of the Capitol and hit her head on the steps and knocked unconscious. Terrible story. And you know, indicative of the experience that police had on that day. But I just note for the record that for whatever reason, the one that they selected, this young-ish blonde woman, long blonde hair, and I wondered I don't know whether that was an intentional thing or whether the Fox viewers might have thought, oh, this is Fox because there's a blonde woman on my TV screen, and the powers that be over at Fox were worried that if anybody surfed over there and found this woman, they'd be like, that's a Fox anchor. I better believe what she's saying. And then the whole thing falls apart. But as it turns out, no, they never left because the commercials weren't on. So anyway, I watched, you watched, we can talk about it. I wasn't, I don't want to come on here and bash the thing. It was a good idea to do. It was, generally speaking, well executed. I hate these things, so I'm biased against the idea of this kind of set play presentation, but I understand that I hate them because I already know what is going to be said, and I already know the story. The only thing that was supposed to be new about this was there was some footage of the riots that hadn't yet been seen, and I guess there was some new information, I saw for the first time. Maybe others have seen it. I feel like it's been reported, but we saw some of the video clips of testimony given in video testimony, video depositions before the committee that were done in private before and now being aired. So we saw Ivanka Trump speaking briefly, Jared Kushner as well. By the way, big loser of the night in terms of the PR efforts. Jared Kushner probably did himself more damage than anybody else whose video was aired. Second most damaged individual in the hearings last night, probably Peter Baker for his book. He, of course, didn't appear, but we'll get to that in a second. But at any rate, yeah, I thought that was... My general review is hour one, pretty good as hearings go. I mean, it was, after all, standard hearing fare in that it was the chairman and, in this case, they call Liz Cheney the vice chair, the ranking Republican member, the vice chair of the committee, each giving rather lengthy opening statements. And I don't know whether it was exactly an hour or not, but the second hour was given over to witness testimony, or at least some part of the second hour, live witness testimony. I thought the opening remarks were generally well done. To be perfectly honest, I thought Cheney did a better job than Thompson did, but that's a difference in their style. Thompson, really honestly, top of his game, some of the best stuff I've ever seen from him. But we don't see a great deal. He's not a real frequent show horse or anything like that, which is a good thing to say about somebody. But at any rate, yeah, Cheney, more skilled in her presentation, more surgical in the insertion of properly inserted knives in the backs of the various actors here, and a more skilled integration into her presentation of some of the video evidence, which, you know, I think that's the correct role. It falls to her to present it that way. The chair has the duty of an overall introduction to things. Of course, it was just one hearing out of, I don't remember how many are scheduled. Was it somewhere upwards of half a dozen? I no longer remember what the primer on it said. So many people found it very satisfying and interesting and compelling to see. I need to see more. I think we all do. I mean, but that's the plan. They couldn't present it all in one night, and it was never the intention to present it all in one night. So I don't fault them for that. But yeah, it's not over. That's what they are reminding everybody this morning. But I don't know. To me, hour two was like squandered. The live witness testimony, I didn't understand particularly why these witnesses were there. Maybe it was the fact that we hadn't heard publicly from this police officer before, and she had a compelling story to tell, and we had heard from several others whose stories were perhaps more compelling, but who had had their chance and told their story and had seen their testimony publicized and then, therefore, attacked. So, for instance, was it Michael Fanoni? I don't know how he pronounces his last name, but he made a huge splash when he testified before the committee months ago, whenever that was. But he was, of course, because he was telling the truth about the January 6th insurrection, attacked by the right. And they've had, several months to attack him along the way. So repeating his testimony live, A, would have been something of a waste of time, and B, would have just primed the right for, to launch their same attacks. They had to try to come up with new attacks for this new officer. Then the choice of the documentarian who filmed, it's no doubt that his film says an awful lot. And you want to establish a foundation for introducing his film. If you were doing it in court, you would. But because these are just hearings, I don't know that it was really necessary to be talking to this guy. And he didn't seem particularly moved even by what he had witnessed and filmed, which is odd because documentarians are supposed to be. But at any rate, I don't know. I wasn't thrilled with the live witness testimony, but it doesn't diminish anything. But yeah, Cheney, I thought, did the best job of it, and it's difficult to say so because she's still Liz Cheney, a Cheney at all, and a bad one at that, and it's difficult to reconcile. But you got to compartmentalize the best you can and take it for what it's worth. She did a good job of setting him up and knocking him down, I guess. The mention of Ivanka Trump, she testified for hours, and this was what they grabbed out of it. And I don't know, I'm sure there will be more, It may just be that most of I think I read 8 hours of testimony that she gave just wasn't relevant to last night's opening presentation. And there wasn't much to what they used from her. They used her bit basically to say, all right, President Trump told everyone that he had won the election, and he demanded that those close to him and in his circle tell him even more frequently that he won the election. Show me that I won the election. Tell me that you believe, or tell me that you're going to fight as if you believe anyway. And Ivanka Trump's testimony was offered as an example of someone very close to him who's considered to have tremendous influence over him, admitting, yeah, I know, we lost that election, and it was just hard to get him to recognize that. But I knew, or became convinced anyway, when Bill Barr said we had lost the election. That was kind of an interesting approach to it. They also played, I don't know where this video of Bill Barr came from, but they had video of him speaking like at a panel discussion, I guess, of January 6th. And he's discussing the fact that he basically told the president, if that's what you want to call him, that he had lost the election, and that most of these stories, there were at least two people did a pretty credible Greg Dworkin impersonation last night, and everybody was using his favorite word, favorite bleepable word of
bullshit.
Right, exactly. Cheney said it. I think Barr said it. It was quoted. I think, yes, it was Mr. Cheney quoting, was it Pence's counsel? We read this email exchange at one point on the show. Pence's counsel corresponding with Eastman and calling out his, I've lost my tape already. His
bullshit. Right,
exactly. I could mix up some of these things. Acting bullshit. Anyway, she's brought in, her testimony clip was presented for the purpose of saying, okay, well then when Bill Barr said there had been no credible evidence presented of any election interference that would have had any material impact on the election whatsoever, that she believed that and not her father. And I'm sure the rest of the 8 hours of her testimony plus other people's testimony about what she did will establish that, well, what did you do about that? And the answer is nothing. And by the way, this is the core of an elder abuse case against her and her brothers and her half-sister as well. So that everybody knew about Trump's delusion and insanity, whichever one you want to call it, sometimes a little bit of both, and did nothing. Not only for his own health, which, maybe that should have motivated you, his own health and safety, but also, there was the safety of millions and perhaps billions around the planet, depending on how crazy the president goes in his last days. Maybe you want to protect the rest of us too. But again, this is Ivanka Trump we're talking about. Also, I just wanted to mention the 8th grade level answer that she gave. Well, I'll give her some slack. I think she might have been just sort of thinking on her feet at the time. But what struck me about the beginning of her answer in the short clip that they took from her many hours, which were perhaps more articulate than this one clip, she is asked, and it is a bad, poorly phrased question. Not disastrous or anything. It's prone to getting a weird answer, which might not be very usable in short format, which was something along the lines of, how did it affect your perspective on things, on the election, when Bill Barr said what he said, which was that nothing had happened and all the claims were BS. And the beginning of her answer is like a middle school essay. How did it affect your perspective when he said this? It affected my perspective by making me think a thing about another thing. Which, what? But maybe she was just trying to get her feet underneath her and orient herself to the question. Because the eventual answer, the fact that it's like one sentence doesn't really help anything either. But you're going to have to expand on this a little bit more, Ivanka, if you want to get an A on this essay. But it affected my perspective. And then, period. She didn't even say, like, by doing something. She just said, so how did it affect your perspective? It affected my perspective. Yes. But the question is, how? Can you tell us how it affected your perspective? Well, eventually she gets around to saying, when Bill Barr said it, I respect Bill Barr, so I accepted what he was saying. Okay. And, maybe a follow-up there was, so what you mean is, at least after you heard from Bill Barr, it was your conclusion that, one, the election had been essentially fairly conducted, the result was accurate, your father had lost, and although he didn't believe he had lost, you did. Yes, that might have been a nice follow-up, and maybe there was such a follow-up. They just didn't play it. I don't know. She looked kind of lost and disoriented. It was a very interesting setting. Both she and Jared, for whatever reason, I don't know where they are, but wherever they are needs a decorator, I guess. They're giving their depositions against like a marble wall of some kind. And it's difficult to tell. I guess it's video testimony, but it's difficult to tell whether that's in a lawyer's office or their house or a mental institution, a courthouse. I can't tell where they are. Their homes tend to be decorated in odd ways, and that could very well have been their own house. I don't know. Anyway, she looked ridiculous in that setting. Jared looked ridiculous in that setting. A lot of commentary on how they looked and presented themselves. Jared presented, like I said, he did himself the most PR damage. Everybody else was kind of screwed from the beginning anyway. So, he wasn't going to do himself any favors. But the thing that really struck me about Jared was we just spent 2 days reading through Peter Baker's PR puff piece about Jared, setting up the book, essentially, or being used as one of the excerpts to sell his new book. But the whole purpose of the article that we read over 2 days was Jared makes a decision to distance himself from the Trump administration, anyway, from Donald Trump himself, from the Trump administration, and I think the phrasing in the headline was wash his hands of the whole situation, which was a very advantageous presentation of what Baker actually had to tell us. It wasn't so much that he washed his hands of the administration or the election claims, and he didn't, and a lot of the testimony that was shown, the 1 minute or so of what he had to say, actually undid all of that inside of 1 minute. But it wasn't, even what Baker presented in the lengthier profile was, he didn't wash his hands of things so much as hide his head in the sand from it, or walk away from it, check out from it, and refuse to take any responsibility for it. You didn't wash your hands. I mean, you might have. You ran them under some water or something, but the blood didn't come off. I tried to wash my hands, but it didn't work. It wasn't effective. And, of course, you washed your hands in what? More filth. All you did was, the Peter Baker spin was, well, I didn't pay attention to what was going on, one, because I didn't believe in it, and two, I was busy with important and weighty matters like Middle East peace. Like, ever heard of it? I'm totally busy with it. Of course, we spent our time the last couple of days disputing whether or not there was, A, any Middle East peace involved in it at all, and B, whether or not it was really just cover for setting up a cash grab for the private equity fund. But even if you believe that that wasn't a part of the discussion, it wasn't much of a Middle East peace deal, for one thing. And for another, in the little clip that gets shown, Jared Kushner shoots Peter Baker's book on Fifth Avenue, like Donald Trump said, right in front of everybody, and says, I wasn't working on Middle East peace, I was working on the pardons. which of course were an integral part of the whole insurrection plan, even though I think that if you pressed him, he would say, oh, well, I wasn't working. I'm not a bad guy. I wasn't working on pardons for Mike Flynn or any of the Congress people who apparently asked for pardons. That was a big splashy moment too, even though, again, we knew that already. But much of the country, I guess, didn't. But I wasn't working on the pardons for those guys. You think I'm some sort of traitor to the country? I wasn't working on pardons for Mo Brooks and Matt Gaetz. I was working on pardons for my dad and other friends of mine. Guys I knew in college who were in trouble with federal felonies. I was working on pardons for them. Oh, I see. So you were a good guy. No, not really. And no. And not only that, but now I guess we know what he washed his hands in. It was in wine, but not the W-I-N-E part, the W-H-I-N-E part. Makes the incredible comment. That's interesting. Like, they asked Ivanka, how did it affect your perspective when you heard that the lawyers were saying this is all crap? It affected my perspective. I believed them. Okay, Jared, how did it affect your perspective when you found out that the lawyers thought this was all crap? Oh, I didn't care what it was. I was busy just trying to get my dad a pardon. And quite honestly, they're always whining, ooh, something's illegal, boo-hoo. He was asked actually specifically about what about when the White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, and others important people in the Justice Department said, if you try to pull off this coup, the way it's described here, it's illegal, we'll resign. Which in olden days was like, ooh, really serious. Then everyone will know that the top law enforcement officials in the country think that this thing is illegal. But lately, not so much, and subject to spin, and of course in the Donald Trump administration will be, they resign because they're losers and they don't love America. You know, if you make a speech about it, and then they would be like, I have no comment. And then everyone would be free to draw their own conclusions. But at any rate, they asked Jared, what did you think about the fact that all these lawyers were saying that they were going to resign if this happened? And he said, well, to tell you the truth, I wasn't paying much attention to it. I was working on pardons. And anyway, basically he said, in all the years I've been there, the lawyers are always whining and they're going to resign about something. So to be honest, I took it as yet more whining, which means he learned nothing. And the power of the resignation is much diminished these days, I guess, and with his generation or whatever. But I thought that was interesting in the way it dismantled Peter Baker's central claim of, at least of his article, if not the central premise of his book. But probably it is the central premise of his book. It may turn out to be. Anyhow, we haven't had the chance to read through that yet. But, the long profile of how he was like, no, I can't have anything to do with that because I'm principled and I'm going to walk away from it. I'm going to keep my head down and focus on Middle East peace. All right, 1, there was no Middle East peace deal. 2, I wasn't focusing on the Middle East peace. I was focusing on pardons for my family and friends, which honestly is a fairly disgusting thing to be saying anyway. Like, what do you need pardons for your friends and family for? Why don't you hang out with better people? You can't choose your family, but you could wash your hands of that. You had no problems telling people you're going to wash your hands of your wife's family. Wash your hands of your own family. They're criminals. Anyway, so not only does he say all that, but the whole thing about I was distancing myself because I don't know what. I was preserving my integrity for something. Well, no, that's out the window. Plus, the people who had integrity, they're wimps. What a bunch of jerks. Illegal, boo-hoo. Well, all that rehab work went out the window. So Peter Baker has been out, I guess, doubling down on it. Not doubling down on his claims, but doubling down, I guess, in the sense of jumping on the bandwagon of the reversal and machine gunning his own book. So I'm sure he'll claim the book is about something else. But this profile, okay, well, not such a great job. Anyway, overall, it was okay, I guess. I'll give it a passing grade. A lot of people really loved seeing it, and it was good to see this information on screens in prime time on all these channels. Ricky, by the way, notes for me that Fox aired it. That is to say, the local, I guess the Fox affiliates that showed news, but Fox News Channel, the cable channel, didn't show it. And it's important to differentiate between the two of them sometimes for particular reasons, because I don't know what, but they are different things. All right, let's see. Here's some other commentary on the subject. Let's see. A couple of things to bring up. Oh, and I forgot. I haven't retweeted Bill's morning tweet. I should find out what I was supposed to have been doing for the last half an hour. The Kagro in the Morning radio show being live now for the past 30 minutes. The question on everyone's mind this morning is, of course, what was Kagro X snacking on during last night's January 6th hearing? If he pleads the fifth, we can assume it was an entire cheesecake. Well, never assume it was cheesecake with me. But I'm not a big cheesecake fan, although I will say that the production staff here in the studio makes one of the best cheesecakes. But it's like cheating as far as cheesecake goes, because it's dressed up in delicious other stuff. What, pecan pie cheesecake or something? It's really very good. Anyway, cheesecake, not always a good bet for me. But what was I snacking on? Well, you almost got it. If I plead the fifth, you can assume something. I should say, yeah, it wasn't that I was pleading the fifth. I was drinking the fifth because I couldn't believe the... All right. But I don't think I snacked during it. I was not hungry. It made me nauseous, the whole thing. So everybody loses. The house wins 0-0 on the roulette wheel, and we take it all. Okay, let's see. Time for us to get set up for our break after having gabbed about this uncontrollably for about 30 minutes. There was some other commentary that came in that I would like to share with you. Arch Pundit sending along, let's see, there are comments of Jordan Holmes, who says that the problem with the January 6th committee is that if at the end of all this you don't find Trump guilty and execute him for, trying to overthrow the country and install himself as dictator, then he'll be president in 2024 and he'll install himself as dictator. He ends that with an expletive, and well chosen there.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Some other commentary to share from around the Twitter world happens to come across the transom here from Helen Kennedy, former newspaper person, although she says newspaperman. How do you like that? From the Daily News in New York and the Boston Herald, who comments on, I guess, went fishing in the dirty waters of Truth Social, or at least somebody grabbed a screenshot from somebody who was Donald Trump, of course, talking on his fake Twitter platform all alone, and had something to say about Ivanka. So you wonder what would he say about Ivanka's testimony that she thought he was wrong. Because you know what his usual reaction. She's crazy. She's a desperate loser. Everybody hates her. Come on, we all admit it. Something like that. But it's his daughter, and he's invested in her, and it's difficult to do. And she's his pride and joy, et cetera, and maybe more than that. Some people suspect he's a very odd fellow, this Donald Trump, and something of a pedophile. So is anyway. Anything could happen here. But at any rate, but no, pretty much standard treatment. Helen puts it this way. Yeah, she's been accused now of being, now she's the new coffee girl. Didn't know her, never heard of her. Ivanka Trump. Maybe she was getting coffee at a campaign headquarters or something like that. Don't know who she is. His actual comment on whatever the F, Truth Social. Ivanka Trump, that's right. She's Trump. I mean, you can just say Ivanka. If you're Donald Trump and you're, first of all, there's no other Ivanka that anybody knows about, and she can now go by Cher, Ivanka, Madonna, what have you. But Ivanka Trump was not involved in looking at, I should be reading it in his voice. Ivanka Trump was not involved in looking at or studying election results. She had long since checked out and was, in my opinion, only trying to be respectful to Bill Barr and his position as Attorney General. He sucked! And I just threw that in there. It really is in there in parentheses. He sucked! Exclamation point. And funny and entertaining, I'm sure, for all of his fans. But that's about as close as he gets to throwing Ivanka under the bus there. She was just trying to be respectful to Bill Barr, who sucks! So why does she want to be respectful to him? Because she's so nice and so respectful. I brought her up so well, so strongly well. And I don't know. Anyway, so he basically says she didn't know anything about what she was talking about, and she didn't study the election results. I did, and she had checked out. She was a White House senior advisor, and checked out. And her husband, also senior advisor, checked out, working on something different. Did you stop allowing them access? Were they in fact checked out the whole time? Going skiing every time something was really difficult to deal with in Washington, or taking a trip somewhere. Right. Well, she was checked out the whole time. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of an interesting observation. I was waiting for what he was going to try and do here with this. But yeah, by the way, we were reading Jordan Holmes's comment here that Arch Pundit sent, and I was wondering if there was more to it. But no, I think he was just sharing it with me because he was calling quite openly for Donald Trump's execution, which is a favorite trope for me on Twitter and on the show, and it's really true, and it would have solved a lot of problems. And I know people don't like capital punishment, but that's what happens in other countries when you try to execute a coup and lose, and there's good reason for it, because if you let them linger, they can use social media or traditional media and rally people to their cause and cause all sorts of confusion and disarray although, you'd say, well, if you do that, you're going to make a martyr out of him. Fine, good, wonderful, fantastic. Let him be a martyr from the bottom of the ocean next to Osama bin Laden, who, by the way, not really much of a rallying post these days. I notice. He doesn't come up a lot. I'm sure he's invoked in his memory as a martyr, but it's not exactly inspiring achievements in terrorism these days, to mention the name of Osama bin Laden. So sink him. And as you know, big fans of the No State Funeral for Trump push here on the show, and it's going to be a lot cheaper. Put him in a bag of rocks and dump him on top of Osama. Done. Anyway, I guess that's why you shared that one with me. Let's see. There's a couple of other things here that are being shared here. Truro Renfro throwing a couple of things in the KITM hashtag queue here, including, what's this? Ron Filipkowski with a clip of Rand Paul, I guess. Is he reacting to the hearings? Let's see what this says. Rand Paul saying, on Twitter every day, thousands of people think that it's just hilarious and they encourage people to attack me. Oh, yeah, that's right. His neighbor doing nothing wrong. And I'm in agreement with that. Let's see. I had 6 ribs broken by a guy who hated Donald Trump, hated my politics. Every day on social media, there are people saying, oh, yeah, we wish it had happened again. Well, that's true. And I'm one of those people. Except I would maybe change the rib count. We could vary it up or down just for variety. But Truro Renfro saying here, let the record show Rand Paul had his ribs broken over a gardening dispute. That's true, too. Right? It's not, the guy may have hated his politics, but there's no indication, right? Since we're doing things like the way the hearing is, we have to prove intent and motivation here. While it's true that he may have hated Rand Paul's politics and hated Donald Trump and his politics, he broke your ribs because you were a jerk about gardening issues. A jury has awarded Senator Rand Paul, according to Reuters here in the clip that's included, more than $580,000 in damages against a next-door neighbor who broke 6 of the Republican lawmakers' ribs during a gardening dispute. So, I mean, there you go. That's not related to the hearings at all, but worth knowing. And there's a second thing here with a link for the Reuters piece and another grab from this piece. Let's see. Who we're looking at here. Boucher, who, like Paul, is a physician, said the attack was not politically motivated. He saw Paul blowing leaves onto his yard, which is described here parenthetically as a dick move, and I think we can say that even, with a lawnmower, and then ran onto his property and tackled him. So that is pretty interesting. So that's what happens. That's libertarian gardening, by the way. Blow the leaves off of your lawn and onto your neighbor's lawn and say, we don't have a problem of the commons here. It's just I want stuff off of my property, and I don't care where it lands. It's not, and there's no commons in between them either. So there you go. And of course, the only solution to that kind of libertarian gardening is, libertarian law enforcement. Tackle the guy and break his ribs. And I'll ask you this. Has he blown leaves onto his neighbor's lawn since with any of the $580,000 that he got in compensation? Did he buy a bigger lawnmower or bigger leaf blower and continue doing this? No reports of it. I'll tell you that. So maybe it was among the more effective methods that he could have used. And if he's as wealthy as it sounds like he may be, living working as a doctor and living in a nice exclusive neighborhood like this, maybe it was a good investment as well. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Greg has sent me something here too. What's up here? Let's take a look at this on broadcasting and cable. NextTV.com. Most, not all, Fox stations to air Capitol insurrection congressional hearing. Okay. So clearing the air about who did and didn't air this thing. Sinclair's Fox affiliates were sticking with the scheduled primetime programming that they usually show on June 9th, but a majority, it says, of the Fox stations, the local affiliates, did appear to be airing the hearing after all. Okay. So that's of some interest, I think. There was some commentary last night about the angles that they were choosing to use in showing the witnesses. I don't know whether that was consistent throughout, but for whatever reason, some of the networks were showing a front camera view of the faces of the witnesses. Others were shooting them from above and behind so that you could see both them and the dais with the members of the committee on it. I don't know if that makes a great deal of difference, but you know, people who are into this sort of messaging and semiotics, I guess, were parsing it better than I can. But that's the answer on Fox World and how they broke it all down. All right, let's see. Other fun things to discuss that are coming across the transom at the moment. I don't know. I think we're all caught up on most of that stuff. Let's see what I put away in pocket to discuss about this. The New York Times, of course, as I said, ran with a number of different takes. I didn't take the Peter Baker effort. I should probably have. I should look into what is it that he's saying today in order to try to recover for his book. I think what I did park here is Maggie Haberman, who's, the standard go-to in a situation like this. What did she have to say about Jared and Ivanka without the power or the masks? Was, I guess, it's the headline on her quick analysis of what their appearances by video did and what kind of impact it had on the hearings. In stark videotaped interviews, they were pretty stark. The setting, they looked odd. There's an interesting point to be made, again, symbolically, of their having been stripped, as she says in the beginning of the article itself, stripped of their White House backdrop, their power, and their masks. So, again, the headline, Jared and Ivanka without the power or the masks. Subheader reads, in stark videotaped interviews, Ivanka accepted the notion that there had been no fraud in the 2020 election. Jared Kushner complained that a White House counsel had been whining. That's the takeaway for Maggie here. And it's, those are the important bits of it, I guess. So stripped, of course, of their White House backdrop, their power, and their masks. In brief video clips, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump appeared in the first of a half-dozen public hearings, there's the answer, held by the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol. First up was Ms. Trump, speaking in a soft voice, and seemingly aware that the video might be made public someday. She said she believed the words of the former Attorney General, William P. Barr, who on December 1st, 2020, said that there was no widespread fraud impacting the election that had taken place 3 weeks earlier. It affected my perspective, Ms. Trump said quietly, peering into a camera for a recorded interview that did not take place in person. I respect Attorney General Barr, so I accepted what he said. What he said was saying, whatever it was. That's how the way they expressed it. I accepted what he said, was saying. That was despite what her father, President Donald J. Trump, was claiming, and despite the fact that, according to several White House aides working alongside her, she did little to try to temper his false claims that he had won the 2020 election. She continued to travel with him as he vented his claims in public. Next was Mr. Kushner. In his video, he was pressed by Representative Liz Cheney, the committee's vice chairwoman, about whether he was aware that the White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, had been threatening to resign because Mr. Trump was making increasingly outlandish efforts to stay in power. Like I said Mr. Kushner, who was rarely heard from in public during his father-in-law's presidency, my interest at that time was on trying to get as many presidential pardons finished as possible. Mr. Kushner repeatedly inserted himself into the pardons process, prompting complaints from legal experts and some of his colleagues. He added that he knew that Mr. Cipollone and the team were always saying, we are going to resign. We're not going to be there if this happens, if that happens. So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you. Yeah, whining. Ms. Cheney, of course, did the same thing as I did, just said, whining over again. Republican of Wyoming, sounding grim, spoke to the hearing room after the video ended. Whining, she said. There's a reason why people serving in our government take an oath to the Constitution. As our founding fathers recognized, democracy is fragile. The people in positions of public trust are duty-bound to defend it, to step forward when action is required. In our country, we don't swear an oath to an individual or a political party. Mr. Kushner's words enraged Mr. Cipollone's former colleagues, many of whom traded messages as they complained to reporters and one another as the hearing went on that the former president's son-in-law was, quote, arrogant. No two people had positioned themselves as prominently in Mr. Trump's White House as his daughter and his son-in-law, who came on as official advisors despite anti-nepotism laws and warnings from other aides that hiring family members can be fraught. Over 4 years, the two tended carefully to their images. Aides feared getting on the wrong side of the couple, who lived in Washington's expensive Kalorama neighborhood and hosted dinners for the city's political elite. The videos made clear that both were aware that things were going awry within the White House, but according to more than a half dozen former Trump advisors, although both have attempted to distance themselves from that period, both, made much of an effort to pull Mr. Trump away from his obsession with staying in power. Instead, they left that task to the paid staff, who in turn kept waiting for the family to intervene more aggressively. Shortly after Election Day, most aides tried to avoid the Oval Office, fearful of having to listen to Mr. Trump vent. They were also eager to avoid the worst-case scenario, a directive from Mr. Trump that might have been illegal and could have ensnared them in an investigation. So very interesting dynamic at the end there. The family saying, I wash my hands of this. We pay you people to deal with the garbage. Do something. And the staff saying, he never listens to the regular paid staff. Only the family have influence on him. We're waiting for you. You have to use your influence to do something about it. And no one would do anything. And like I said, well, what you got to do is the violation of the oath for whoever was paid staff, and just straight up elder abuse for family members who refused to do anything, and get everybody charged up and put away. All right, well, let's see. Other interesting news to share. Well, there's plenty. Let's see. There are some small bits I wanted to share. I guess Murdery Trader Green spent the afternoon on the House floor, probably taking advantage of the special orders speeches to rant for enough time to get 2 or 3 clips of her being dumb circulated on Twitter. So I don't know, there was a 5-minute thing. Oh, okay. Or whether she took longer. But let's see. Anyway, she took the time to try and pre-butt the hearings, and insist that nothing had happened and everybody was just peacefully demonstrating, and maybe it really was a setup after all. But the one that made the rounds first, of course, was she was pleading on behalf, I guess, of people who are still sitting in jail for their role in the January 6th insurrection, and her alleged concern that they are being poorly treated in jail. This has been an ongoing theme for her, and apparently she had had enough yesterday and was furious that their civil rights were, as she said, being flagrantly violated. That's right. That's what she said. Although I'm beginning to think that she, there was that theory a while ago that circulated that Donald Trump was doing the same thing, that he intentionally making mistakes so that his material would go viral and his fans would excuse all the mistakes. Everybody else who hated him would be laughing in his face about the mistakes, but the material would get circulated. And it might be the same thing here. Let me see if I can pull it up, though, because it's a short clip of Murdery Trader Green saying this dumb thing. But you just got to hear her saying it in her dumb voice. But I guess it's going to take some time here. Here we go. Pull up the original. And we got to unmute the thing. And who knows at what point it's rolling. But okay. All right. Freeze it here. And we can rewind it. And then unmute it. Good, and then roll it.
And why their due process rights are being so flagrantly and horrifically violated. And why
it's pretty good. I like that. So flagrantly and horrifically violated. Horrifically, she got right. Flagrantly, I mean, it might be the case that someone involved in all of this is flagrant. It might even be Murdery Trader Green herself, for all I know. She is, after all, in a sleeveless outfit. It would be very easy to find out if the flagrant violation was, in fact, her own. But you got to wonder. It was just days since she said that, something was happening and growing in a peach tree dish, right? It wasn't her, but it was Lauren Boebert, her close cohort, who said, what was it? Oh, right. It was her written tweet. Therein lies the problem, right? These people. Anyway, I just thought I would share that before the weekend. There was some other thing that she did that was equally stupid, but not the same sort of slip up. And hey, that's always funny. Update for you on Peter Navarro, who is a lying sack of crap. That's not the update. The update is Politico says that Navarro is lying about everything he says about the conditions of his arrest. You'll recall that he was, in fact, arrested the other day for his contempt of Congress, but he insisted that he had been so poorly treated, in fact, that his rights had been flagrantly violated, basically. And then it turns out, no, most of it was lies or just exaggerations, at least according to the FBI, which everybody knows you can always believe the FBI. But in this case, it's very easy to believe because Navarro is a lying sack of crap. FBI, Navarro called arresting agents Nazis. That's the lead, or that's the line they're using for the headline. Not really what I liked about the story. But prosecutors dispute the former Trump trade advisor's claims that he was shackled and denied food and water following his arrest on a charge of defying a subpoena, which is odd because they give you, Burger King if you're a church murderer. But anyway, it doesn't matter because it was all a lie anyhow. Kyle Cheney, Josh Gerstein, and Nicholas Wu all get bylines on this one. The former Trump administration official Peter Navarro called the FBI agents who arrested him Nazis. That happens a lot, I bet. According to Justice Department documents filed Thursday in court, accusing Navarro of repeatedly lying about the conditions of his arrest. FBI agents arrested Navarro at Reagan National Airport last Friday on a pair of misdemeanor charges that he acted in contempt of Congress by defying a subpoena from the January 6th House Select Committee. I don't know why it's a misdemeanor, but that's what they say. Since his arrest, Navarro has been on a media tear, accusing the FBI of denying him a chance to call a lawyer and depriving him of food and water. And, there's usually some kernel of truth to this somewhere, but I mean, like if they arrest you and you say, I want to stop at Bertucci's for some chicken salad. It's terrific, by the way. Have you tried it? It's wonderful. So you could understand the request, but if they say, no, we're actually going to go to the jail and book you now. Although, they would say, well, I've been denied food and water. Well, technically you didn't ask for water. Oh, right. Well, I would like a Pellegrino as well. Well, no, you can't have Bertucci's chicken salad. And you can't have the Pellegrino. I've been denied food and water. No, you'll get it later. It just, we're denying you what you're asking for now. But you could see how it might happen like that. Anyway. He wasn't shackled either. Was he handcuffed? Yes, apparently. Is that shackles? No, not technically, but it all hangs on the technical definitions. Anyway, the Justice Department says all of those claims are false, and it appended a summary of the circumstances of Navarro's arrest on an FBI 302 report written by the two agents who arrested him, Walter Giardina and Sebastian Gardner. Now, you might wonder, and I think he would have a case, and this is how he started his complaints. When I say case, I mean he would be, you could say, all right, I see the point. It's not a case that he'll win or get any money for, but arresting him at the airport on a misdemeanor charge, like on a felony, sure. I don't care that you're at the airport. It's where you are. We're arresting you, and that's an easy thing to do, especially if you know somebody's got travel plans and they're otherwise avoiding you because they're afraid they'll be arrested. You wait at the airport. I have no objection to that. Although, the idea of making a public spectacle over a misdemeanor charge is something different. But okay, it's a high-profile case. What are you going to do? Anyway, the government filing Thursday seems to mock Navarro's priorities. It says FBI agents offered to contact an attorney for Navarro, and that was another of his complaints. They held me incommunicado. They wouldn't even, you're supposed to get one phone call, right? I wanted to call my lawyer, and they wouldn't let me do it. And apparently it went more like this. The FBI agents offered to contact an attorney for him, but he wanted to use his phone. And why? He wanted to get his cell phone back. We've confiscated your cell phone. You're under arrest. Can't have your cell phone. Well, can I have it back? I get one phone call, don't I? Sure, you do. You want to call a lawyer? Use our phone here. We'll call. Who is it? We'll call and then we'll hand you the phone. No. I want to use my phone. All right. Already suspect, right? Well, there's many things you could be using your phone for that we don't actually permit you to do. But if you want to contact the lawyer, we can make an arrangement for you to do that. We do this all the time. Oh, well, I want my phone. And not only do I want my phone, he wanted to use his phone to let a media outlet know that he was likely to miss a scheduled TV interview because he was arrested. Well, no, you can't have it for those purposes. Sorry. You are actually under arrest. When Navarro was offered a chance to call an attorney, according to the FBI agents, the defendant noted that he was preparing to proceed without one. So, okay. From the report, Special Agent Giardina asked, do you have an attorney you'd like to call? What is the name of your attorney? The FBI report says. According to the report, Navarro replied, I'm supposed to be on live television tonight. I'd like to call the producer and tell him I'm not going to be there. Can I have my phone? And to which the answer was, you don't seem to understand this whole prisoner thing. No, you can't. Navarro made statements to the effect that the arresting agents were kind Nazis and how could you live with yourselves? The report is. Is that something? How could you live with yourself? The chicken salad. When can I don't know. I don't have any reports that he wanted chicken salad. It's just something that popped into my head. Because it is good chicken salad. This segment brought to you by nobody. But if it had been brought to you by Bertucci's, it would be fantastic. You can pay me in chicken salad. It's easy. Anyway, how do you live with yourselves? Can I have my phone? No. But I want to call a lawyer. All right, what's your lawyer's name? All right, I don't really have a lawyer, and I'm going to represent myself. I want to call a TV guy. Well, no, we're just not doing that. How can you live with yourself? It's humorous. Anyway, while some of Navarro's allies have claimed he was pulled off of an airplane, the report says he was intercepted by the FBI in a jetway at the airport as he prepared to board an American Airlines commuter flight bound for Nashville. And again, if they know you're going to be on that flight, yeah, they wait there. The one-door thing. By the way, this was Ted Cruz's idea. There's only one way in and out of this airplane. We'll just wait here for you and nab you there. We didn't pull you off an airplane, which wouldn't be a terrible thing to do, but maybe a misdemeanor would be a little excessive. Thrown off of an airplane is something I would have supported, but anyway. Navarro has also claimed that he was shackled after his arrest. The FBI report mentions handcuffs, but no shackles, nor does it address any security practices he might have encountered after he was handed over to Deputy U.S. Marshals at the courthouse in Washington last Friday. The Justice Department's filing came a day after the department urged the judge in Navarro's case, Emmett Mehta, we hear about Judge Mehta all the time, to quickly enter a protective order preventing Navarro from disseminating evidence provided to him by prosecutors. Navarro is due in court to be arraigned on the charges on June 17th, but he has requested a 45-day delay, citing his effort to retain an attorney and to litigate a civil lawsuit against the department and the January 6th Select Committee. Now, at this late date, he needs to get a lawyer. I need 45 days. I think you should have been able to anticipate that, but he'll probably get some time, if not all 45 days for that. The department said there was no legal basis to delay speedy trial obligations to accommodate a civil lawsuit. That's true, especially one as frivolous as that. The department is urging Mehta to reject the request, noting that Navarro still has a week to obtain counsel and that his request for a delay would be disruptive to the case. I agree, but we'll be right back. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It was occurring to me this morning as I was thinking about the show coming up and saying, all the time that I spend identifying where you are when you come back from a break on a podcast, probably not even necessary. You know where you are. But then I think about my role as host of the show, and it's the hosting duties is to welcome you back from listening to music. So, which you probably preferred, quite honestly. Anyway, that's about the end of the substance of the Navarro story, but just to add a few more details so that you know what's going on. The FBI's summary of Navarro's arrest provides a little more detail about the manner in which he was taken into custody. He was accompanied by an unidentified individual and was in the jetway when taken into custody at 11:14 a.m., according to the agents. After he was led down the jetway steps, he was handcuffed, and his wallet, cell phone, and pen were taken and put in a manila envelope, the report indicates. Pretty standard at this point, right? Navarro was taken to the FBI's Washington field office for processing, including fingerprinting and a DNA sample, the report says. After Navarro complained that his handcuffs were causing shoulder pain, they were replaced with a second set and loosened, which the agents said relieved Navarro's discomfort. He initially rejected an offer of food, by the way, according to the summary, but asked for some at 12:08 p.m. and was given chocolate, nuts, and dried fruit. He was later asked whether he wanted anything else to eat and declined, the report said. So I was, denied food and water. Well, it doesn't say anything about water, does it? And I say I was denied food and water. Not that I was denied food. I was denied food and water. And the and water never showed up. I don't know what his complaint is, but... And by the way, so he's arrested at 11:14, and let's see, 46 plus another 8, 54 minutes later, he's hungry enough to ask for some food. It's only 12:08, but okay, nerves, what have you, you're being arrested. Maybe he didn't eat breakfast. Anyway, not denied food, not shackled, although I wonder whether the handcuffs were causing shoulder pain, so they gave him something that would allow him to, draw his wrists apart a little bit so that there was not so much stress on those. And maybe instead of your standard issue on the cop belt handcuffs that hold your wrists very close together, maybe there's a length of chain in between, and therefore those are shackles, manacles, I guess. But anyway, just wanted to let you know that he's full of it and give you the FBI's version of what actually happened there. Anyway, we should switch gears at this point, I think, and catch up with some items that have been contributed to the show by some of our good friends of the show and contributors. Oops, I've actually printed the thing, and I don't have my... Well, now it's going to be spitting out paper. Oh, we can all listen to it being printed. I think I might have been able to cancel the print there, but okay. One via email from our good friend of the show, David Paquette, who very frequently has tidbits to suggest to us. And then, of course, our frequent contributor, Darwin Darko, who this time did not record for us or forward to us the recording of his read-through of a very interesting article, but did record it, in fact, but of course, for his own podcast. So, like, branching out, I like that. I mean, he's been doing podcasts, I guess, for a little while, but this is nice. And he shared the article with me, and I think I pocketed it. Oh, look, Politico, now like the Washington Post, among those outlets that don't let you just switch to the original view without taking you out of pocket. Okay, so got to jump back and find the article that Darwin sent to us then and suggested for our reading here. Oh, it's here somewhere. It's not that far back. But about the need for a memorial to the victims of gun violence in this country. And I must have scrolled right past it somehow after all. I'm going to have to look again. Sometimes I'm looking for a particular picture in the way that... There it is. Pocket lays things out. It's from the Washington Post on May 25th. So I've been waiting a while on this one, and I thought we'd get to it last week, and we didn't. Let's make sure to do it now. He wrote and suggested that this would be something we ought to read and comment on the show. And maybe that was it. Maybe he just wanted to hear the commentary on it, rather than hearing his own repeated to him from his own podcast. We need a national memorial to gun violence now. A perspective, as opposed to opinion, article by Philip Kennicott, senior art and architecture critic. Not frequently thought of as, I mean, it's a memorial he's talking about, but I wouldn't think to go to the art and architecture critic for an article like this, which is part of what makes it so interesting, and probably part of how Darwin came across it too, with his own interest in art and probably architecture as well, although I've never heard him mention a particular interest, but I know about his interest in art. It would follow that a different kind of physical art, public art, is architecture, particularly in the Washington area. But let's see. This should be interesting. I think now I understand why they call it perspective rather than opinion. We need a national memorial to gun violence now. It must be at the end of the National Mall, near the base of the U.S. Capitol, where loyalty to the National Rifle Association has long trumped the national welfare, including the survival of our children. Yes, I mean, much talked about in the last couple of days, the balance that the Republican Party strikes between when they're actually faced with the choice of our children or our guns, and they've been very adamant that the guns are to win in that. And it's not just metaphorical. I'm departing from this article, and I really shouldn't, but I just wanted to make this point. If we didn't make it the other day, and I'm not certain whether we made it on the air, but I certainly made it on Twitter, which was that the question has actually been asked and answered of the Republican Party, and gun enthusiasts and gun rights conservatives already have answered the question. Not just well, we refuse to do anything to remove certain guns from circulation or tamp down on their availability or whatever, and therefore they're being used in school shootings. So therefore, you could reasonably conclude that we value the guns more than the children. It's a bit of a, I mean, it's true in the sense that they're really not doing anything to protect anybody, especially the kids. And the reason is because they fetishize the guns so much and they require the NRA's support, and they feel like they can't do anything or they'll lose base support. But it is something of a stretched conclusion to say, well, they therefore value their guns more than the children. But I think a more direct way of putting it is when we were discussing the regulations on carrying guns in the classroom that are in place in Utah and that places like Ohio are now putting into effect, but lots of other states looking at or have already copied the idea of, well, if you go through certain rigmarole, training, regulation, etc., will allow teachers to carry guns in the classrooms. The real contest, as we said, was set up between the currently super popular among Republicans Chris Rufo strategy, which is to base everything on this claim that you are for parents' rights and that parents have the right to know everything that's going on in the classroom, versus the gun rights absolutist view that there ought to be no right whatsoever in the public to demand to know whether someone else has decided to exercise their God-given Second Amendment rights. God-given, but God wrote it down through the hand of our founding fathers and a quill pen, you see. But the God-given right to bear arms and not tell anybody that you're bearing arms, versus the God-given right that parents have to know everything that's going on in their child's education and in the classroom where it's happening. And how do you reconcile these two things if the rule says that the teachers carrying guns, A, don't have to tell anybody that they are carrying a gun, or B, are prohibited from telling the students that they carry a gun, and C, that parents are forbidden from asking whether their child's teacher has a gun? How do you reconcile that in particular? C, you're forbidden from asking, and yet you have the right to demand anything. So that's a tough question, but that's a direct question as between the kids and the guns. And the winner in that contest for many years now has been the guns. The gun rights and their right to refuse to tell anybody whether they are bearing arms at the moment actually trumps the parents' rights to know about their kids and the conditions of their education and their safety while they're learning. So they have been asked that question directly, and they actually have answered it directly. The guns win. I just want to reiterate that. I think that's extremely important. Now back to our article that Darwin had sent us from Philip Kennicott, senior art and architecture critic at the Washington Post, making a call for a national memorial to gun violence, that it should be near the Capitol, where loyalty to the National Rifle Association has long trumped the national welfare, including the survival of our children. Design and construction of the memorial should begin immediately, and the memorial should be imposing, sobering, and monumental, which I guess that works because it's a memorial, not a monument. So it's okay to say that a memorial should be monumental in a syntactical way, that it would not be acceptable to say that a monument ought to be monumental, although it's a bit of an axiom. Anyway, it should include the names of every victim of gun violence, which is a problem because we'll never stop, and this is going to end up taking up the whole mall and running off into the tidal basin, and it's never going to stop, which of course is impracticable. But that is the point. The memorial is meant to be finished only when America's grotesque fetish cult of guns has finally yielded to peace. So, very pointedly offered this impossibility. There is one obvious and necessary site for the memorial: the lopped-off triangle of land on the north side of the Capitol reflecting pool at the base of the Capitol, a plot bounded by Pennsylvania Avenue, Constitution Avenue, and 1st and 3rd Streets Northwest. You'll have to look at a map, I guess, to see this. This is the last large open space close to the Capitol. And the new memorial must be close to the Capitol, close enough to implicate and shame the men and women who work inside it on a daily basis. Year after year, decade after decade, gun violence remains our preeminent source of national grief and humiliation, a battle we lose every hour, with a toll beyond calculation if measured in the only term that matters, which is misery. All of this could be stopped, and we could join the host of other countries, many of them developed, prosperous democracies, in which this scourge is unknown. We could, were it not for the gun lobby and its dominion over a sufficient number of elected representatives to thwart all efforts at reasonable gun control. The plot on the northwest side of the Capitol grounds has the symbolic resonance and destiny that the original designers of the mall would have wanted. By the way, did you hear the witness last night? The documentarian, was he maybe Irish? Was that the accent that he was carrying? And it was very interesting hearing him talk about things that were happening on the mall, but having him pronounce it with the British accent, not, Irish. When I say British, I mean like Britannic Islands, although I'm sure the Irish would dispute that. But I guess the English, the British English pronunciation of M-A-L-L is Mal, not Mall, like, the way we Americanize it. But I learned that while I was over there. But Mal, and then with the Irish accent, but he was also sort of Americanizing it in a way, and I don't know whether he was consciously doing that so that people would know what he was talking about. If he had said the Mal, people might have looked at him funny. So he slurred it a little bit. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know if you picked that up or whether I'm making that up. We'll see. Anyway, again, let me get back to the article. The plot on the northwest side of the Capitol grounds has this symbolic resonance and destiny that, density. I was wondering about that. The destiny. What makes it have destiny? Well, it's a very interesting and symbolically placed and all that. But density. Density? The symbolic resonance and density. All right. That the original designers of the mall would have wanted. A gun violence memorial situated there would give symmetry across the north-south axis of Union Square, site of the brooding and powerful memorial to Ulysses S. Grant. Thus, it would balance the message of growth and fertility embodied in the U.S. Botanic Gardens, which is cited in the mirror image plot along Independence Avenue. One side of the square would be a memorial to death, on the other side, a garden of life. And between them, a reflecting pool and a reminder of the Civil War, a war of fratricidal carnage that we actually fought to an end, unlike our ongoing age of self-destruction. Very interesting and symbolic language here. The memorial would also be contiguous on its southeast corner with the Peace Monument, erected in 1878 as a means, and meant as a Civil War memorial. Atop this 44-foot-high marble sculpture, the figure of grief hides her face, weeping on the shoulder of history. At its base are the figures of two tiny children, representing Mars and Neptune. But forget their allegorical meaning. Let them just be children, like the children who died at Newtown, Connecticut, like the children who died in a fourth grade classroom on Tuesday in Uvalde, Texas. Visitors to the new National Memorial to Gun Violence will be able to look up at the Capitol and ask questions prompted by the old Peace Monument. Why can't the United States of America protect its children? Why do we continue to use weapons of war to make war on ourselves? Why have we committed to a doctrine of self-destruction when once we thought we might wrangle history and define our own destiny? Why does grief never take a vacation? And what would this new memorial look like? There is already a gun violence memorial project conceived by Mass Design Group and it's, I don't know, appears to be an acronym, MASS Design Group, and conceptual artist Hank Willis Thomas, which has been installed in Chicago and is now on view through September in Washington. It offers one very sensible possibility for what the new National Memorial might look like. It includes 4 house-like structures made of glass bricks with niches in which the families of gun violence victims can place mementos of their lost loved ones. Scaled up to a necropolis, it could make the right impression, a modernist Hooverville of death in the shadow of our great national charnel house of inaction. But it would also need a focus, a site for public speaking and gathering. The essential thing is that the new memorial force us all, and especially our feckless political leaders, to get beyond the generalities and obfuscations they have used for decades to perpetuate this endless and chaotic civil violence. It must be a place where thoughts are specific and prayers are articulated publicly. No politician may come and simply repeat the platitude of thoughts and prayers. What specifically are you praying for? And does your religion allow you to ask God to fix the things you might easily fix, if you had the courage to do so? After every mass shooting, turn on the brightest lights, power up the microphone, and let no political leader who makes the symbolic pilgrimage escape speaking actual truth on a site sacred to those who suffer. It should be the obvious place where the president, after yet another mass killing, like the racist killing of 10 African Americans in Buffalo less than 2 weeks ago, now a little more, goes to make his or her statement and say his or her prayers, if he or she is religious. Let the motorcade travel up Pennsylvania Avenue, reversing the direction of the inaugural parade, to symbolically enact the undoing of our own power, the uselessness of political leadership in a culture bought and paid for by the gun lobby. If the memorial is classical in design, and perhaps that will speak better to the audience that needs to hear this message, let it be engraved not with vague platitudes, but very specific pleas and demands. Our poets will say it better, so let them dress up words to this effect and chisel them on the frieze. Here we grieve those who died because we were impotent to help ourselves. Regardless of the style or particulars of its design, the essential thing is that it impose itself on the landscape. It must be large enough that no tour bus can pass by without someone on board asking, "What is that? Why is it there? Why are they still hammering names on its walls, and how can we make them stop?" Perhaps it should have a bell, a huge, somber bell loud enough to be heard inside the Senate chamber. Let it ring once for every gun death in the United States that day. With well more than 100 gun deaths per day, it would mark the quarter hours at least. Make it the Liberty Bell, the actual Liberty Bell, and ring it until it shatters. Because who can say we're free when we cannot free ourselves from this self-immolation? There are huge hurdles to creating new monuments and memorials in Washington, a process that takes years. This particular parcel of land is at the end of the National Mall, in an area controlled by the architect of the Capitol, and subject to a complex process of oversight. But the new memorial should be defined from the beginning as a temporary structure, to be demolished the minute it is finished. Perhaps when gun deaths fall below some designated daily toll, ideally 0, but at least something that isn't an international embarrassment. And let's hope it is finished. Let's hope that one day, for a full day, the bell never tolls, and the masons chiseling the names on the walls can put down their tools. That's it. That's the end. That's very interesting. Totally different kind of perspective there, although we did get down to process at the end. Oh, who controls this parcel of land? The architect of the Capitol. Very interesting. We can approach some of it. But a lot of things, a lot of heavy thoughts, and I appreciate having it to add to the mix, Darwin. And everyone perhaps wants to check out what Darwin himself had to say about this. Like I said, this article is from May 25th. So you'll have to travel back in time a little bit, and I'm not certain which episode of his podcast he used this on, but I guess your starting point then for your search is May 25th or after. And I don't know whether this podcast is more frequent than this one, more than once a day. I doubt it, but okay. So there's a limited number that you'll have to look through, but if you want to try and find it, you can check it out, and I'm sure that Darwin will update us at some point and tell us which day it is, and then I can pass that on to you if you don't want to search. But you could do worse this weekend than searching through Darwin's podcasts in order to find it. They might have descriptions of what's being talked about that day, but if not, would it be such a bad thing if you caught up on Darwin's podcast and a couple episodes of it over the weekend? You might be pleasantly surprised. Particularly, I still think it's amazing every time I realize he's doing a podcast on all sorts of things, but his interest in art, it's just such an interesting, different direction considering where our connections overlap. I just think that's interesting. Expand your mind a little bit. Good time to do it. All right, let's see. Another comment or two that have come in at the time. Let's see. Ricky has something additional to say about Peter Baker. Every time you mention Peter Baker, I giggle a little bit because the local leader of the Green Party here on PEI, Prince Edward Island, is Peter Bevan Baker, who, in my experience, is a genuinely nice guy and a direct descendant of one of the fathers of Confederation. So how do you like that? That is interesting. Always a local perspective. All politics is local, Ricky. We understand that. Let's see. Do I have time to get to, in this segment, what I got sent, what David Paquette sent to me? Let me see. I don't know. It was a nice essay, which, let me see, can I open it up here? It came in email and as an attachment, and so it's going to take some doing to open it up here. But is there some introductory material? Yes, that he included in his letter. And I didn't get, I should have asked, specific permission to share all of this, but let's see if we can keep things. I'll read ahead a little bit and try not to disclose anything that I think he wanted to keep in confidence if there was anything. But he's written to say he's attaching an article, which he wasn't sure whether to call it an essay, a meditation, but that he wrote about Sam Alito's draft opinion striking down Roe v. Wade. So it's timely that we need to get this out here because it's expected that they finally will release that opinion any day now. So let's get this on record. But he notes in writing to me and to Greg about this, and Greg has had a chance to read through it and just thought it was a terrific essay. So I'm going to jump right in and maybe we'll do it right after the break because now we're getting up there. So I'll give you the background information here first. We'll take our break, catch my breath, get some water, and settle in with this essay. But it's very telling. He describes the process by which he comes to the conclusion that he needs to write this. When I heard about the logic that Alito used in that ruling, I could not stop thinking about it for days. As he calls it, the most boring earworm in history. But when I get like that about an issue, I know that I have to write about it or I will never stop thinking about it. If only a grumbly email to an old friend, and that's what we've got here, but a stylistically beautiful grumbly email apparently. Since I'm a math nerd, some such writings often involve number crunching, and part of the attached is in that category. So he is sending this along, what he calls on tradition, for us to include in KITM, hoping it meets our standards. I am sure that it does. It's already met Greg's. I wanted to be surprised myself in reading it on the air and reacting to it in the immediate sense. Let's say he says it's more on the philosophical side than purely legal. And let's see. Oh, and we are to alert him as to when we might be using it. I think probably after the fact. Well, we can tell him we're going to read it today. If you're listening live, the time is now. But I'll send you a note that says you can look for it on the Friday, June 10th podcast. or if you listen to this podcast before I get a note to you, well, this serves as your notice that coming up after the break, we'll be reading it. By the way, he also includes an interesting tidbit that we'll read over our outro music. Says, speaking of a-holes, as he was, on the court, did I ever tell you guys, me and Greg, that I went to Holy Cross with Clarence Thomas? How about that? I think we met waiting tables in the dining hall. We were not exactly friends, but his dorm was next door to mine, so we met on the sidewalk that ran behind them quite often, and we often stopped to chat. In retrospect, it's amazing to me that he seemed like a very nice person. I even liked him. And here, I thought I was a good judge of character. Well, that's an odd one. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, where did I open this? How come it's not immediately obvious? Did this open in a different application? I had my whole thing all ready to go, and then I'm going to flip through every one of these tabs here, and none of them are it. I got to open this again, or can I close? There we are. I found it. Okay. Oh, it was opened up in one of the word processing applications because it was an attachment. But this is On Tradition, the meditation thought essay that David Paquette sent along to us. By the way, you can find him on, certainly on Twitter, although only rarely on Twitter, apparently. I looked up his Twitter handle, and it's not frequently used. I guess I could say that, so maybe it's not even worth announcing at this point. And then I ended up closing it too. But let me find it for you again in case you want to find him there. And we can all get on. And I was thinking, maybe I should look him up and tell him, all right, well, if you happen to be online now and on Twitter, you should listen. I'm going to read your essay. Sage in R.I., Rhode Island. Sage in Rhode Island. But like I said, not a frequent Twitter user, but in case you wanted to follow along, one of the many options. All right, so let me, how come, what's not, there we are, down in the toolbar. It's a Mac that I'm working on here. I was wondering, well, where's the Pages app that opened it up, and I can't find it. But there it is. Here we are, ready to begin. On Tradition by David Paquette. The jurisprudence in Justice Samuel Alito's draft opinion on Dobbs v. Jackson, the Mississippi abortion ban case, depends heavily on his views on American tradition. He believes that in the absence of clear, explicit constitutional guidance, centuries-old American and British tradition should set the legal standard for present-day America. But do longevity and past popularity always point the way to justice? No, of course not. But careful examination of two very long-held and widely respected American traditions suggests that they do not. Like some elite American families, the first of the two traditions to be dissected goes directly back to the Mayflower. As children, we were told that Puritans came to America in pursuit of religious liberty, although the specifics are left vague. The details of their story show that the Mayflower Pilgrims chiefly wanted to be free, to exclude anyone who was not a Puritan from their colony, and most especially to prohibit Catholics from living among them. The gut-level aversion to Catholicism was intense and widespread in British colonial America. 15 years after the Mayflower landed in Plymouth, a splinter group of Puritans advocated for true religious liberty in Puritan Massachusetts. It didn't go well for them. Ordered to be silent, they resisted, and under imminent threat of trial and likely execution, the heretics escaped from Massachusetts. Fleeing 75 miles to the southwest in the middle of the night, their leader established Rhode Island as a haven of religious freedom. It would be a lively experiment in tolerance, as he described it in his colonial charter petition to King Charles II. Even much-shunned Jews and Quakers were to be welcomed there. Yet one of Rhode Island's earliest legislative acts as a chartered British colony was to ban Catholics. Oh well, I guess it didn't last. Following Alito's example of citing archaic British legal opinions as precedent, we should note that British tradition offered powerful support for its colony's official anti-Catholicism. When Rhode Island was founded, England was in a prolonged period of persecution of Catholics, sometimes by military force. Charles II, hoping to heal his divided realm, had tried to be permissive of Catholicism, but the Parliament reversed his actions. Even a century after Charles's reign, when Queen Victoria's government put Sir Charles Trevelyan in charge of handling the 1840s mass starvation in Ireland, he urged Parliament to do as little as possible to help the Irish. On his watch, one of every 8 Irishmen died of starvation, forcing another 8 to flee their homeland, to escape the famine, and to relieve pressure in the pitiful food supply that Trevelyan's policies allowed the Irish people to get. Wow. How could such cruelty have been authorized? It was because Trevelyan and many others in Parliament believed that helping the Irish survive would have defied God's will, that the famine was a divine judgment against the Irish people for refusing to renounce Catholicism. That mindset has vestiges even in current-day Britain. It was not until 2015 that an heir to the British throne could legally marry a Catholic without being disqualified from the royal succession. And to this day, no Catholic may legally occupy the throne. All of this is implicit here, but now I feel like stopping to comment just a little bit. A lot of people observed that the legal reasoning in Alito's opinion was highly suspect because it depended so greatly on the writings of an Enlightenment age author, but not a particularly enlightened Enlightenment age author. But going back to, and I can't recall who it was because it just wasn't that interesting to me, the fact that he was drawing on this particular legal and political authority from British history was, all you needed to know was that he was drawing on British history for these things. And sure, you could always say, well, they were products of their times, as we often say about our own founders who were also slave owners, etc. So he was bound to be involved in some activity that is no longer viewed favorably or even tolerantly in polite society. So that shouldn't surprise anyone. But what was really interesting about it is that he validated these, he validated the views of that he was interested in, even though they were accompanied by repugnant views of the times on other subjects, but gave validity to it anyway. So here, with that test in mind, there's a lot that's repugnant about British legal tradition from the same time period. But if you can compartmentalize, as Alito allows himself to do, then we can select from among these thoughts. While we can denounce the repugnant aspect of anti-Catholicism, we can also say, well, there was a pretty strong British tradition. At the minimum, maybe the thing you can distill from it is that you ought not to let Catholic doctrine dictate public policy. Why, they were not even tolerant of the existence of Catholics. As an example, it's clearly the case with the Irish. We want to erase their very existence, and we certainly don't care what happens to them in the middle of the famine. They are being punished for their very Catholicism. Okay, well, you don't want to carry all of that over, but you can and should include, as part of the British tradition, certainly the most mild thing you could extract from it is that maybe Catholicism isn't a great basis for public policy. And when it comes to abortion, it doesn't require adherence to Catholicism, of course, to adhere to anti-abortion stances, but they're the chief driver of it, at least in this country, and people have been willing to adopt it and graft it onto their own beliefs for other reasons. Anyway, I just found that kind of interesting. I don't think that's the main thrust of David's article here. How could such cruelty have been authorized? He explains, of course, it's part of British tradition. And to this day, as they say, no Catholic may legally occupy the throne. This is an anti-Catholic strain to their very structure of their government. When Trevelyan's inhuman policies sent a torrent of desperate, half-starved Irish immigrants to the United States, a major anti-Catholic political party, the American Party, was founded. Although the party did not last, it was lost to the chaos surrounding the Civil War. Its central tenets survived. 60 years later, in the 1920s, a revitalized activist Ku Klux Klan made the anti-Catholic cause its own, provocatively demonstrating against Catholic Americans and the Pope, of course, holding cross burnings in or near heavily Catholic communities across America. The first Catholic school in America was founded in 1640, but it was not until the mid-1920s that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on the legitimacy of diplomas that Catholic schools award, deeming them of equal value to other schools' diplomas. This was not long after the court had a Chief Justice for 11 years who had graduated from a Catholic grammar school, high school, college, and law school. The decision was widely condemned. In the first 35 presidential elections, no major party nominated a Catholic. Then, in 1928, New York's Catholic governor, Al Smith, was the Democratic Party nominee. He carried 8 states. Historians chiefly attribute his humiliating loss to anti-Catholicism. Finally, we elected our first Catholic president in the 44th quadrennial election, 172 years after the original Constitution guaranteed that no religious test would apply to federal government office. Even then, Kennedy's religion was a major issue in the 1960 campaign. After that, no major party nominated another Catholic for 60 years. Well into the 20th century, most Americans, except for Catholics, like Justice Alito, of course, considered anti-Catholicism to be justified, since it was consistent with the time-honored and much-respected American and British anti-Catholic traditions, and it didn't violate any explicit constitutional limitations. I'm going to read that once again as I was thinking of something else, some extra commentary here. Well into the 20th century, most Americans, except for Catholics like Justice Alito, of course, considered anti-Catholicism to be justified since it was consistent with the time-honored and much-respected British and American anti-Catholic traditions. It didn't violate any explicit constitutional limitations. That's true, too. It doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution that you can't discriminate against Catholics. But what I was thinking about, by the way, as I was reading through this, is the fact that, well, let's see, how many are there now? Catholics on the Supreme Court. Because, now that's something I got myself in, I guess you could call it trouble for on the interwebs, specifically on Twitter, not all that long ago, a couple of years ago, and saying, gosh, it occurs to me that, maybe now is the protections for abortion have been in jeopardy for some time. But a couple of years ago, a renewed threat to abortion rights and reproductive health rights in general reared its head. And at the time, I was thinking about the number of Catholics on the Supreme Court. And of course, one of the democratically appointed members of the Supreme Court, there have been certainly Catholics nominated to the Supreme Court by Democrats as well, but that has been certainly not a test for inclusion, but the Republicans have tended to nominate Catholic judges to be justices on the Supreme Court of late, because it's well known as shorthand for they tend to be, when they're conservatives, tend to be anti-abortion. And before they felt like it was reasonable to ask people straight up whether they were, how they would rule on Roe v. Wade, and they always tried to dodge by saying, well, it's settled law, and they still do that, right? And even current nominees continue to do that. But if they didn't feel like it was plausible to ask them that straight up and get a real answer, they would nominate Catholics, conservative Catholics, to the Supreme Court as a stand-in, essentially, for that answer, I think. And that, the current lineup of the Supreme Court is, I would say, in terms of its representative capacity for, at least religiously speaking, the religious preferences and denominations of the American populace wildly out of line with it. There's nowhere near this many Catholics in the country. But what are we talking about? I think we have to look at each of the individual profiles. It's not entirely clear about the religion of each of them, and not everyone is open in declaring it. But let's see, early life. You have to look at the early life and education of each of the justices, and is Chief Justice Roberts Catholic? Is there any indication in his profile here? I'm not certain whether or not there is, or any indication of let's see, early life and education, anything that says how he was raised. I don't know. Maybe you know this offhand. Here we are. In 1965, 10-year-old Roberts and his family moved to Long Beach, Indiana. What beach is there in Indiana? Okay. Where his father became manager of a new steel plant in nearby Burns Harbor. Very interesting. But here, Roberts attended La Lumiere School, a small but affluent and academically rigorous Catholic boarding school in La Porte, Indiana, where he was captain of the football team. Congratulations. And a regional champion in wrestling as well. How about that? So attended Catholic school. Doesn't really tell me that he's a current or practicing Catholic. And that might be something that he keeps relatively private, but maybe But there are, of course, there's Alito, who we know to be a practicing Catholic. There's Clarence Thomas, who I believe is a convert as well. There's Sonia Sotomayor, who I believe is raised Catholic, but not as a conservative Republican. Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett. So what are we talking about here? 1, 2, 3, 4, if you count Sotomayor, 5 for Alito, Clarence Thomas 6, John Roberts 7. Are we talking about 7 of 9? Out of them being Catholic, and the others are the others Jewish? My goodness. Wow. Well, that's a hell of a lineup. And maybe we're counting people wrong, and maybe maybe Neil Gorsuch, who was raised Catholic but married an Episcopalian and has since been going to the Episcopal Church. I think I read that once when we were sorting through this stuff. Anyway, it's just kind of remarkable that that's the case. And now I guess we should head back to David's essay about this. I don't know if David's going to appreciate this much divergence from the crafting of his essay from my own commentary or what. But I think you knew what you were getting into, David, when you asked us to read it on the air, as opposed to recording it and sending it to us that way. If you want it read straight and with any commentary being merely your own, you got to record it yourself. Anyway, excellent observation, and because it gave me a chance to think a little bit more about what you were saying, that well into the 20th century, most Americans were okay with anti-Catholicism and considered it to be justified because it's part of our American and British legal and historical traditions, which was good enough for Alito when he was using it to strike down the right to abortion in this country. The second grim American custom we'll examine has even more enduring roots in our history. The first Africans to be abducted from their homes and forcibly brought to America to be enslaved arrived in Virginia the year before the Puritans stepped onto Plymouth Rock. All right, we all know now to be 1619. Okay. That custom got undercut when it was constitutionally outlawed after 246 years, although dating as far back as it did and being as widely accepted as it was, slavery itself would easily have qualified as a bona fide American tradition by Alito's definition. But the tradition in question here is not slavery itself. It is the tradition that was overlaid on slavery to deal with slaveholders' anxiety about their captives. Most American slaveholders agreed that the Africans they held were not human beings. In their minds, this justified their enslavement. The more self-forgiving among them saw themselves as deliverers of their slaves. They believed that lifelong bondage in America was a blessing compared to a life of, quote, heathen freedom in Africa, a view that is still taught in some American schools in 2022. But regardless of his philosophical beliefs about slaves, the slaveholder understood how he would have reacted to having his own home and homeland, friends and family, and life and livelihood taken from him by force. That understanding, it is too generous to call it empathy, caused masters to fear for their lives, especially as the slaves' numbers increased geometrically, driven by the enormous profitability of having a workforce that never gets a day off, doesn't get paid, and cannot quit their jobs. Since the masters had stolen millions of men and women's labor and progeny to do with as they pleased, it is no surprise that slave owners, a tiny minority of Americans, controlled most of the wealth of America by the 1840s. But with fabulous wealth came the haunting prospect of a slave revolt, which was a constant source of dread. Rather than depending only on force of arms, slaveholders and their enforcers established a system of cradle-to-grave psychological conditioning. Their method, a form of terrorism, used unrelenting dehumanization and intimidation. Slaves were expected to be submissive in every possible way, without question or hesitation, throughout their lives. Under the rules that slave masters enforced, any escape attempt, backtalk, disobedience, or even simply looking a white person in the eye could get a slave swiftly and brutally, quote, corrected, either by flogging or mutilation. The, quote, crime of looking at a white woman with anything that could be interpreted as sexual desire would quickly result in a black man's death. Although that penalty could be given at a master's whim to any slave considered to be insolent or unruly, or even just to make an example. I mean, surely they didn't have to have any reason at all if the slave was their own property. Lynching and random torment were deeply embedded in supposedly genteel Southern society as tools of control, not only for their victims, but also as a warning for fellow slaves who were forced to witness the brutality. All slaves knew that they could be easily beaten, maimed, or strung up at a moment's notice. Often the only thing keeping them alive was their tremendous monetary value as loan collateral or on the auction block at the slave market. The latter prospect was a potent threat. There was always the peril of being sold down to the Deep South, which was well known for its brutality. Legally sanctioned and popularly accepted oppression continued for more than a century after the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, serving as an inescapable caution to African Americans to, quote, keep to their place. The day-to-day insults of the Jim Crow laws were only the tip of the iceberg. The core of that tradition was terroristic, while it also served as gruesome entertainment for whites. For nearly 90 years after the Civil War, about once a week on average, mobs of white families, including children, would flock to a town square somewhere in America as if to a festival. They gathered to watch and celebrate as black men and women were tortured and hanged, or sometimes burned to death, all with the permission and participation of local police. Disgusting contemporary black and white photos show crowds of witnesses posing, heads held high, under the remains of their victim. These ordinary citizens were proud to be there, proven by the fact that they posed, smiling, for photos with the corpses. Most of all, they took great pride in observing a respected tradition that was a mainstay of their culture. Remember, that's the reasoning behind what Alito was saying. It was not until 2022 that Congress passed and President Biden signed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Law, which made lynching a federal offense. Nearly 70 years after the brutal 1955 Mississippi murder of its 14-year-old namesake, who was kidnapped from a relative's home, tortured, shot in the head, weighed down with cast-iron farm equipment, and thrown in a river. All for the unwitnessed, quote, crime of flirting with a white woman. Such flirting, whatever that might be even, would carry a death sentence in the extrajudicial system of lynch law justice. Emmett, an outgoing and mischievous Chicago teen on the third day of his visit to the South, would not have known that. Knowing what could happen to them if they somehow offended or even just irritated virtually any white person, 4 generations of slaves' descendants could do little but acquiesce to living in the lowest caste of American society, a status that was sanctioned by long-time and well-respected custom and widely accepted law, and was enforced by the constant threat of serious injury or death. In fact, these views of black people were so deeply held for so long that it was only 55 years ago in Loving versus Virginia that the Supreme Court struck down laws that outlawed interracial marriage. And even then, more than 60% of the American people opposed the ruling. Interracial marriage is not guaranteed in the Constitution. By the standard that Alito laid out in his draft of Dobbs v. Jackson, all laws that once prohibited interracial marriage should be reinstated. This is not idle speculation. It is revealing of his underlying agenda that when the Supreme Court overturned the Defense of Marriage Act in Windsor v. United States, Alito's dissent strongly criticized the then 46-year-old unanimous Loving decision, which the court's majority had cited as precedent in Windsor. Given the character of the 2 noxious traditions described above, long and widely held tradition is not the best touchstone for constitutional interpretation, at least not the way that Justice Alito defines it. But perhaps there is a better way to weigh American tradition and measure its value. In Alito's originalist concept, decisions of the first Congress carry far more weight today than those of the current 117th Congress, even though the first Congress was elected by a tiny minority of the 1789 population of 3 million, a minority that included only the wealthy white males who were allowed to vote or hold office back then, while the 117th Congress was sent to Washington by the votes of 160 million men and women of all races and social classes. As of this writing, Roe v. Wade has been in effect for almost 49 and a half years. When the ruling was announced in 1972, there were nearly 212 million people in the United States. About half of them are still alive. Of the current population of 329 million, about two-thirds have lived their entire lives after Roe. After very nearly a half-century of legal abortion, only 1 in 6 Americans want abortion to be banned outright. Some 30% want it legal with some limitations, and the rest favor allowing abortion to be available with no restrictions. If we add up the number of Americans who have lived at least some part of their lives in post-Roe America, we find that 440 million Americans have lived under Roe's rules. Now, since the Constitution was ratified in 1788, there have been 540 million Americans in all. This means that 81% of all Americans who have ever lived have lived since Roe v. Wade was decided. Using a conservative estimate of 70% approval for some level of abortion rights, and counting only those who have lived at least a year since Roe passed, about 57% of all the Americans in history have approved of legalized abortion. There's your number crunching. But abortion was not invented in 1972. Roe v. Wade merely formalized the prevailing sentiment of the time, so that even the conservative 57% number is now a low estimate. It does not include many Americans who, long before Roe, believed that abortion should be legal, but who never lived to see it happen. It does not include some of those who got abortions before Roe, nor some who arranged for such abortions, nor some who paid for their services. Many of them provided long before the Roe decision was handed down. Nor does it include some of those who performed abortions before Roe. Some were crudely self-induced, some done by surgery, often also crude. And for hundreds of years before such procedures came about, Americans and British midwives had concocted and administered herbal, quote, remedies to end pregnancies. That includes many centuries before Puritan pilgrims crossed the ocean to avoid the society of Catholics they reviled, and before slave merchants began to fill their American customers' slave quarters and purses. If that's not well-worn, broadly accepted tradition, it's hard to say what could be.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, that does it for another perfect broadcast of the Kagro in the Morning Show. Everyone who heard it live, let's all keep it to ourselves and let the podcast listeners enjoy the perfection that the show really was. Thanks to David Paquette and to Darwin Darko for contributing to today's show. As always, appreciate it, and we will see you next week.